How Mossad used MI6 agents to pull off a secret desert rescue is a story that does not exist in any official archive. It is a ghost operation, a narrative written in whispers, erased by the shifting sands of the Sudanese desert. It is a story of necessary lies, of calculated betrayals, and of a moral calculus so cold it burns. It began not with a bang, but with a failure. Khartoum, 1984. The city was an oven, a sprawling, dust-choked capital simmering in political instability and the oppressive damp heat of the Blue Nile. Here, survival was a matter of managing perceptions. To be seen was to be noticed, and to be noticed was to be endangered. This was the world of Asher Malka, though no one in Sudan knew him by that name. To the Sudanese government, to the expatriate community, and to the ever-present Mukhabarat, the secret police whose eyes were everywhere, he was Peter Hauser, an agronomist from Switzerland. He was a neutral observer, a man specializing in dryland farming solutions, a consultant for a faceless European NGO. His cover was mundane, meticulously crafted, and deliberately boring. He discussed sorghum yields and irrigation techniques with bureaucratic patience. He lived in a modest flat in the Amarat district, drove a nondescript Toyota Land Cruiser, and drank bitter coffee with low-level ministry officials. His entire existence was a performance of calculated mediocrity. But Asher was a Katsa, a field operations officer for Mossad. His real mission had nothing to do with crops. It was a mission of ghosts, to find, gather, and exfiltrate thousands of Ethiopian Jews, the Beta Israel, who had fled a devastating famine in their homeland only to find themselves dying in the squalid, sun-scorched refugee camps of eastern Sudan. It was an operation of impossible logistics and unbearable moral weight. Every day, Asher lived with the knowledge that families were disintegrating in the camps, that children were succumbing to disease, and that his window to save them was closing. His current state was one of controlled desperation. The primary extraction route, a silent naval operation off the Red Sea coast, codenamed Operation Brothers, was compromised. A recent patrol by the Sudanese Navy, tipped off by Libyan intelligence, had nearly captured a team. The coastal route was closed. Asher was now reliant on clandestine flights from a remote, abandoned British airstrip deep in the desert, a far riskier alternative. The conflict centered on one man, Jonas Afewerki. Jonas was not a soldier or a politician. He was a Kes, a spiritual leader, an elder whose presence was the glue holding his community of several hundred refugees together. He refused to leave until every member of his village was safe, but his community was too large to move in one risky airlift. Asher's orders from Tel Aviv were blunt: extract the Kes. His influence was essential for the morale and integration of the refugees already in Israel. But the situation had deteriorated. Jonas, through his refusal to be moved, had attracted the wrong kind of attention. He was no longer just a refugee, he was a problem. Specifically, he was a problem for Colonel Ibrahim Suleiman, the head of Sudanese state security in the Gedaref region. Suleiman, a man who saw conspiracy in every shadow, had become convinced that Jonas was not a priest, but a key organizer for the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, a rebel group fighting the Ethiopian government. This false assumption was being actively encouraged by Libyan agents in Khartoum, who saw an opportunity to disrupt a potential anti-Ethiopian network. Suleiman's Mukhabarat had raided Jonas's section of the camp twice. The Kes was now in hiding, moving every night. He was no longer just a target for rescue, he was a target for elimination. Asher sat on his rooftop, the call to prayer echoing across the city, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and dust. He had lost his sea route. His air route was perilous, and his target was being actively hunted by an enemy he could not fight. He had no diplomatic cover, no military support, no way to move a man and his family from a guarded camp to a secret airstrip 150 miles away while being hunted by Suleiman. He needed a miracle. Or, failing that, he needed a tool. He needed someone who could move through Khartoum with impunity, someone Suleiman wouldn't dare to touch. He needed the British. The British ambassador's residence was an oasis of colonial arrogance in the heart of Khartoum. The lawns were impossibly green, irrigated with water Asher knew was desperately needed elsewhere. Gin and tonics were served on silver trays, the ice clinking in defiance of the 110-degree evening heat. It was a grotesque display of detachment, and it was the perfect place for Asher to hunt. He had engineered his invitation to this reception for the Queen's birthday through his NGO cover, a tedious process of ingratiating himself with a junior cultural attaché. He moved through the crowd of diplomats, military attachés, and wealthy Sudanese businessmen, a polite, forgettable Swiss agronomist. He avoided the French and German attachés, whose languages he spoke too well, and kept his gaze fixed on his target, James Chilton, the MI6 head of station. Chilton was precisely what Asher had expected. Tall, carrying the effortless confidence of the British upper class, he held his drink as if it were a scepter. He was surrounded by fawning diplomats, laughing at a joke that probably wasn't funny. He represented everything Asher, the son of Moroccan immigrants to Israel, viscerally distrusted: the casual power of empire, the belief that the world was their chessboard. Asher waited for his moment. It came when Chilton broke from the group to get a fresh drink, standing alone by the bar for a brief second, his social armor down. Asher stepped in, extending a hand. "Mr. Chilton, Peter Hauser, a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard good things about your embassy's development work." Chilton gave him a brief evaluative scan, the scan of a man who sorted people into two categories: useful and irrelevant. "Hauser, you're the Swiss crop fellow, aren't you? Working out near Gadaref?" "That's me," Asher said, forcing a slightly awkward academic smile. "Trying to make sorghum grow on sand. A fool's errand, perhaps." "Indeed," Chilton said, his attention already beginning to drift. "It's not just the sand that's the problem," Asher said, lowering his voice just enough to signal a change in topic. "It's the politics. Your friends and ours seem to be everywhere." Chilton's eyes snapped back to him. The bored diplomat vanished, replaced by the station chief. "Our friends?" "The Libyans," Asher said, as if sharing a distasteful secret. "My NGO has 2 supply trucks, and both were stopped and harassed by Sudanese security near the Kassala Road last week. The officer in charge wasn't Sudanese, though. He had a Tripoli accent, asking questions about our work, our roots. It's making my job difficult." This was the bait. Asher had spent weeks building a quiet profile of Chilton. The MI6 station chief was running his own shadow war against Gaddafi's intelligence services, who were aggressively expanding their influence in Sudan, fueling conflicts in Chad, and threatening British interests. For Chilton, the Libyan presence was not a nuisance, it was the threat. Chilton's posture didn't change, but his gaze hardened. "Is that so? I'm surprised they'd be interested in sorghum, Mr. Hauser." "They aren't," Asher said. "They're interested in the roads. Who is moving where they are going? They seem to believe the refugee camps are screening centers for anti-Ethiopian rebels, specifically the TPLF." "And are they?" Chilton asked, a casual testing question. "I see farmers, Mr. Chilton. Women, children, starving people. But the Libyans, they see ghosts, and they've convinced Colonel Suleiman he's seeing them too. It's a dangerous situation. It makes one feel exposed." The dialogue was tense, a delicate dance of subtext. Asher was planting a seed, aligning his problem with Chilton's. He was establishing himself as a man on the ground, a neutral observer who disliked the Libyans as much as Chilton did. Chilton studied him for a long moment. "The world is a complicated place, Mr. Hauser. One must be careful what one plants. You never know what will grow." He nodded, a curt dismissal, and turned back to the party. Asher stepped back, melting into the crowd. The encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes. The seed was planted. Chilton hadn't seemed to comprehend the gravity of the exchange, or so it appeared. But Asher knew the type. The man who pretended disinterest was often the man who was most intrigued. The Mossad Katsa still didn't have a solution, but he now had a potential partner. A partner he intended to deceive completely. Asher returned to his flat. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the aging air conditioner. The paranoia of Khartoum returned instantly. He checked the street, scanned the rooftops, and drew the heavy curtains. He performed his nightly ritual. a meticulous sweep of the apartment for listening devices. He found nothing, which, as always, made him more nervous, not less. He went to his study, a room filled with agricultural journals and soil maps. He unlocked a heavy steel filing cabinet, removed a false bottom, and retrieved his communication device, a burst transmitter disguised as a scientific calculator. This was his only link to Tel Aviv. His fingers moved over the keys, typing a coded message that was short, precise, and would be seen as operational insanity by his superiors. To Lev, Mossad HQ, from Adam, Asher's codename. Sub-J, Asset Zev, Jonas, Suleiman is active, asset compromised, estimate 72 hours until capture. All local extraction routes are negative, risk too high, have initiated contact Lion, MI6, proposing new plan, false flag. Will sell Zev to Lion as high-value TPLF political asset. Lion will believe asset is theirs, sought by Libyans. MI6 will use diplomatic cover for extraction from camp, will intercept MI6 convoy at predetermined RV, request Kaidan team on standby at airstrip. Risk, high total compromise of Lion relationship if exposed. Alternative, loss of asset. He transmitted the message. The device beeped once, confirming the encrypted burst had been sent. Now, there was only the waiting. This was the revelation. This was the moment the plan coalesced, moving from a desperate hope to a concrete, terrifying operation. Asher finally understood that he couldn't beat the system. He couldn't sneak past Suleiman, and he couldn't evade the Libyans, but he could use an entirely different system, the British diplomatic service, to do the work for him. He was proposing to lie to a friendly, if rival, intelligence service. He would paint Jonas, the gentle spiritual leader, as a hardened political operative. He would fabricate an entire legend for the man, a background, a list of contacts, a history of anti-Libyan activity, and feed it to James Chilton. He would manipulate MI6 into using their resources, their agents, and their diplomatic immunity to break Jonas out of the camp, all while believing they were securing a major intelligence prize for London. And then, in the middle of the desert, Asher would steal him. The gravity of the decision settled on him. This wasn't just risky, it was a violation of the unwritten rules of espionage. You didn't burn a friendly station chief unless the stakes were existential. But to Asher, they were. The survival of Jonas and his family, and the promise he represented to the Beta Israel, was worth the diplomatic firestorm. A sharp noise echoed from the street below, a vehicle door slamming. Asher froze. He moved to the window, peering through a tiny slit in the curtain. A dark sedan was parked across the street. Two men in plain clothes stood beside it, smoking, looking up at his building. The Mukhabarat. Were they watching him? Or was it a coincidence? In Khartoum, there were no coincidences. He felt the cold sweat on his neck. His cover felt paper-thin. He was a non-entity, a Swiss agronomist. They had no reason to suspect him. Unless his brief conversation with Chilton at the party had been overheard, unless Chilton himself was under surveillance. The atmosphere in the room became suffocating. The suspense was no longer abstract. It was immediate. The sounds from outside, a distant siren, the murmur of the men's voices, were the sounds of the net closing. He waited, motionless, for 20 minutes. The men got back in their car and drove away. Asher let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. It was a random patrol, or it was a warning. It didn't matter. It cemented his resolve. He could not wait for Tel Aviv to approve. He had to assume the plan was active. He began to work, fabricating the intelligence portfolio that would condemn one man and save another. 3 days later, Asher was sitting in a room that smelled of mildew, stale tobacco, and fear. It was an MI6 safe house, a damp apartment above a failing textile shop in the Souk Omdurman. James Chilton sat across from him at a metal table, a file open before him. The bravado of the ambassador's party was gone. This was the station chief in his element. "This is an extraordinary claim, Mr. Hauser," Chilton said, his voice flat. He tapped a photograph that Asher had provided, a grainy long-lens shot of Jonas. "You, an agricultural expert, have identified a senior TPLF commander hiding as a refugee. A man, you claim, that Libyan intelligence is hunting personally. A man named Gideon. Gideon was the name Asher had invented for Jonas. It sounded militant, strong. "I don't look for these things, Mr. Chilton," Asher replied, his voice calibrated to sound earnest, slightly overwhelmed. "I told you my routes are being watched. My local drivers, they talk. They hear things in the camps. They pointed him out to me. They say he's a big man. When I saw him, I recognized him from an internal security briefing my NGO circulated months ago. We were warned to avoid political figures. This too was a lie. The briefing was a forgery Asher had created on his own printer, aged with tea and dust. "And you brought this to me?" Chilton asked. "Why not your own embassy? The Swiss are neutral." "Neutrality is a luxury, Mr. Chilton," Asher said, leaning in. "Last night, Colonel Suleiman's men raided the camp again. They took 10 men. Gideon was not one of them, but they were asking for him. My driver says they were torturing people in the open. This isn't about politics anymore. It's a man's life, his family's life." Asher pushed another document across the table, a fabricated transcript of a radio intercept. It was crude but plausible, filled with coded references to the preacher, Jonas, and Tripoli's interest. "Suleiman isn't acting on his own," Asher said. "He's taking orders from the Libyans. They don't want Gideon alive. They want him disappeared. You and I both know what that means." Chilton was silent. He stared at the papers, his mind clearly working through the angles. Asher had presented him with a perfect scenario. Chilton's primary mission was to counter Libyan influence. Asher had just handed him a high-value Libyan target, a walk-in intelligence asset of immense value. Rescuing Gideon would be a major victory for MI6, a source London would celebrate. It would confirm Chilton's own theories about Libyan penetration of Sudanese security. "And what do you get out of this, Mr. Hauser?" Chilton asked, his eyes narrowing. "Your altruism is admirable, but unconvincing." This was the confrontation, the moment of judgment. "I want Suleiman's men off my supply routes," Asher said simply. "And I want the family that helped my driver to be safe. That's all. I can't extract them. My NGO has no standing. But you have a diplomatic passport. You have vehicles they cannot search. You can move Gideon and his family from that camp to Khartoum. You can fly them to London, debrief them, and Suleiman will be left with nothing. The Libyans will be furious, and my routes will be quiet again. You get your asset. I get to do my job." It was a brilliant deception, because it was built around Chilton's own ego. Asher wasn't asking for a favor. He was offering Chilton an opportunity. Chilton closed the file. He stood and walked to the grimy window, looking down at the crowded market. He was making the calculation. Risk versus reward. The risk was a diplomatic incident if caught. The reward was a human intelligence source, straight from the heart of the anti-Libyan resistance. "If we do this," Chilton said, turning back, "it will be my operation, entirely. You will provide the location of the asset. You will provide the all clear. And then you will disappear. You will not be present. You will not be in contact. You will go back to your farm, Mr. Hauser. If this goes wrong, I will not know your name. Is that clear?" This was the extreme choice Asher had feared. He would not be able to control the extraction. He would be blind, but he had no choice. "Clear," Asher said. "Good," Chilton said. "My team will move him tomorrow at 020 Antri. They will use an embassy Land Rover. They will bring him and his immediate family, wife and 2 children, to a holding site in Khartoum. From there, we will move them to London. Now give me the exact location." Asher drew a map of the refugee camp on a napkin. He pointed to a small cluster of huts near a dry well. "He will be here. My man will light a small fire at 0145 as a signal. If there is no fire, the operation is off. 0145, a fire. My team will handle the rest," Chilton said, taking the napkin. Asher nodded. He was forced to accept the terms. He was handing his most valuable asset over to a rival service, trusting them to execute a rescue for all the wrong reasons. His own team, the Kaidan unit, was already in the desert, waiting at the airstrip. Now he had a new terrible problem: how to intercept an MI6 convoy that he wasn't allowed to follow. The ordeal began with a lie. Asher left the safe house and immediately drove, not to his flat, but to a small, cluttered radio repair shop. The proprietor, an old Yemeni Jew, was one of his most trusted Sayanim, a local Jewish helper. Without a word, the old man handed Asher a small, dark object. It was a magnetic tracking beacon, military grade. Asher's real plan had one more component. He returned to the safe house parking area. Chilton's official vehicle, a black Land Rover with diplomatic plates, was parked in the alley. Under the cover of darkness, moving with a speed that belied his academic cover, Asher crawled under the vehicle. He felt the grime and hot metal. He attached the beacon deep inside the rear wheel well, a place no driver would check. He was now in violation of every rule. He was tracking a diplomatic vehicle of a friendly nation. He drove back to his flat, his heart pounding. The guilt was a physical weight. He was using Chilton, he was using the British government, and he was risking a catastrophic international incident. But then he thought of Jonas, of the families in the camps, and the guilt was burned away by resolve. The next 24 hours were the longest of his life. He spent the day in his office, pretending to write reports on soil salinity. The sun set. The city grew quiet. He sat in his dark apartment, a high-frequency scanner on his desk, its faint static the only sound. He was monitoring two frequencies, the tracking beacon and, through a sophisticated signal bounce, Colonel Suleiman's tactical channel. At 01:45, the ordeal for MI6 began. James Chilton was not in the vehicle. He was at the embassy, monitoring his own operation. He had sent two of his best agents, a former SAS man named Thompson for security, and a fluent Arabic speaker named Sarah, posing as a nurse. They drove the diplomatic Land Rover, its flags covered, into the labyrinth of dirt tracks surrounding the Gaddaraf camp. They found the small, controlled fire. Jonas and his family, his wife Maren and their two small children, emerged from the shadows, their faces masks of terror. Sarah quickly ushered them into the vehicle, speaking quiet, reassuring words. Thompson, his hand on his weapon, scanned the darkness. The exchange took less than 30 seconds. The Land Rover pulled away, its engine a low growl. Asher heard it all, not in sound, but in the steady ping of the tracking beacon moving on his map. They were clear. They were moving west, toward Khartoum. Chilton was keeping his word. But then, the other frequency crackled to life. Suleiman's channel. A voice, sharp with anger, cut through the static. The fire was seen. Sector 4. They are moving. I want all units on the Khartoum road. All units. Find the Shifta. Asher's blood ran cold. Suleiman hadn't taken the bait. He hadn't been fooled. He was tracking Jonas independently. Chilton's team, believing they were safe, were driving directly into a trap. This was Asher's transformation. His clever plan, his manipulation, had just signed the death warrant for Jonas and two British agents. The guilt was overwhelming. He was no longer a puppet master. He was a failure. He grabbed his keys. He ran to his Land Cruiser. He had to intervene. He had to break Chilton's primary rule. He wrenched the truck onto the street and sped out of Khartoum, driving into the pitch-black desert, following the beacon signal, a single point of light on his receiver. His own ordeal had just begun. He was driving a civilian vehicle with no diplomatic cover into a Sudanese military dragnet. He was chasing an MI6 vehicle that was being hunted by the Mukhabarat. He pushed the truck to its limit. The desert was not empty. It was alive. He swerved past abandoned vehicles, rocks, and the carcasses of animals. The static on Suleiman's channel grew louder. "I have a vehicle," a voice shouted. "A Land Rover, moving fast. No plates." It was Thompson. He'd spotted the checkpoint and had veered off-road. "Fire warning shots!" Suleiman commanded. Asher heard the distant, faint pop, pop, pop of automatic gunfire over the radio. Chilton's team was now in a chase. They were running for their lives and they didn't even know why. They believed it was a random checkpoint. Asher saw the headlights of the chase, miles ahead, two sets of lights bobbing erratically in the dust. He had to intercept them. He had to lead them away from the road, away from Suleiman, and toward his own extraction point, the abandoned airstrip. He turned off his own headlights, driving blind, guided only by the tracker and the radio. He was tired, he was thirsty, and he was terrified. He was no longer an agronomist or a spy. He was a man racing death in the dark. The dry riverbed, or wadi, was a scar in the landscape, invisible until you were upon it. This was the rendezvous point. Asher's Land Cruiser slid down the gravel bank, his engine screaming. He was minutes ahead of the chase. Waiting in the shadows were two unmarked desert vehicles, heavier, more powerful than his own. The Kidon team. 3 men, their faces obscured by scarves, their weapons held with practiced ease. They were the tip of the spear, the human tools Mossad used for its most sensitive work. "They are coming," Asher shouted, his voice hoarse. 2 minutes. Suleiman is right behind them. The team leader nodded once. "The strip is hot. We have 5 minutes on the ground. No more." Headlights appeared, cresting the ridge. It was the MI6 Land Rover, bouncing hard, a trail of dust pluming behind it. Thompson was a brilliant driver. He plunged the vehicle into the wadi, sliding to a halt. Moments later, a second set of headlights. Suleiman's military truck. The MI6 agents, Thompson and Sarah, burst from their vehicle, weapons raised, shielding Jonas and his family. They saw Asher and the Kidon team. Their faces registered pure, unadulterated shock. "Hauser!" Thompson yelled, his SAS training taking over. "Who the hell are these men? Stand down! Diplomatic immunity!" Suleiman's truck screeched to a halt on the ridge above. Soldiers began pouring out, fanning into a firing line. "There's no time!" Asher screamed, running to the MI6 vehicle. "Get them out! Get them in my trucks!" "What is this?" Sarah shouted, her composure breaking. "You set us up! This is an ambush! It's a rescue!" Asher roared back, pulling Jonas's son from her arms. "Suleiman isn't stopping for your diplomatic plates. He wants him." This was the climax. Not a firefight, but a terrifying high-stakes transfer of assets under the gun. The Kidon team moved with brutal efficiency, ignoring the British agents, grabbing Jonas and his wife and hauling them toward their own vehicles. James Chilton's voice suddenly erupted from Sarah's radio. Report. What is your status? Who is firing?" Sarah, her face pale with fury and realization, grabbed the radio. "Sir, it's Hauser. He's here. He has armed men." It's a double cross, sir, and Suleiman is here. He's on the ridge." A spotlight from Suleiman's truck flooded the wadi, catching them all in its blinding white glare. A voice boomed over a megaphone. "Surrender! You are surrounded! Send out the Shifta!" Thompson raised his pistol, but he knew it was useless. They were outnumbered 20-1. Asher grabbed Sarah's radio. "James!" he shouted, knowing Chilton could hear him. "James, your agents are compromised. Suleiman is here." "I am taking the asset. You have 30 seconds to make a choice." He threw the radio back to Sarah. He turned to Thompson. "You have 2 options. Stay here and explain to Colonel Suleiman what MI6 is doing kidnapping refugees in the desert. Or you follow me. Right now." The small symbolic victory was complete. The Kidon team had Jonas and his family secured. The engine of their lead vehicle roared to life. Suleiman's voice boomed again. "Final warning! Fire!" A shot cracked the air, kicking up dirt near Thompson's feet. The decision was made. "To hell with you, Hauser!" Thompson yelled, but he was already shoving Sarah toward their Land Rover. "We're following!" "Go!" Asher yelled to his team. The 2 Mossad vehicles tore out of the wadi at the opposite end, throwing up a massive cloud of dust. Thompson, cursing, threw the MI6 Land Rover in gear and chased them. The Sudanese soldiers, confused by the sudden split and the dust, began firing wildly into the darkness. Asher was in the lead truck, Jonas and his family huddled in the back. He looked back. The MI6 vehicle was with them. Suleiman's trucks were trying to follow, but they were heavier, slower. Asher had his asset. He had saved Jonas, and he had just kidnapped 2 MI6 agents. The used had become the dependent. He had won, but the cost was a burning bridge that lit up the desert night. The next hour was a blur of high-speed evasion. The Kidon drivers were masters of the terrain. They drove without lights, using starlight and an intimate knowledge of the landscape to navigate a maze of canyons and flatlands, pushing their specialized vehicles to speeds the Sudanese trucks could not match. The MI6 Land Rover struggled to keep up, but Thompson was skilled enough not to be left behind. The radio was silent, save for the increasingly distant and frantic commands from Suleiman, who was organizing a wider search grid. But it was too late. They were gone. They arrived at the return point, a long, flat stretch of desert marked only by 3 faint battery-powered strobes. It was the abandoned British airstrip. As they rolled to a stop, the impossible appeared on the horizon. A black shape, impossibly large, descending without lights. A C-130 Hercules, flying nap of the earth, its engines a low guttural moan. The plane didn't stop. It taxied to the end of the strip, turned, and its rear cargo ramp began to lower. This was the final judgment. The Kedon team rushed Jonas and his family from the truck toward the plane. Jonas paused, turning to Asher in the darkness. He spoke, not in Amharic, but in perfect, archaic Hebrew. "You are the one who comes for us?" Asher, startled, could only nod. The Kess placed his hand on Asher's shoulder. "The Lord has blessed your deception." The weight of the Kess's words, an absolution and a judgment in one, hit Asher harder than any bullet. He hurried them up the ramp. The MI6 Land Rover pulled up. Thompson and Sarah got out, their faces streaked with dust, their eyes wide with a mixture of fury and disbelief as they stared at the Israeli aircraft. James Chilton emerged from the passenger side. Asher froze. He hadn't seen him in the truck. In the chaos of the chase, Chilton must have been in Khartoum, but his voice on the radio? No, Chilton hadn't been in the embassy. He had been in the vehicle the whole time. He had been on his own operation, and Asher had intercepted him. The realization shifted the power dynamic one last time. Chilton walked slowly toward Asher, the roar of the C-130's engines whipping the air around them. He stopped a few feet away. This was the final confrontation, spy to spy on a secret runway in hell. "You lied to me," Chilton stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Asher said. "He's not TPLF. He's not a political asset, is he?" "No, he's a Jew, a priest. They are my people." Chilton looked past him, at the family disappearing into the dark maw of the aircraft. He looked at the Kedon soldiers, at the Israeli markings on the tail of the plane, and the entire audacious deception laid itself bare. "You compromised my station, Hauser, or whatever your name is. You endangered my agents. You used me. You used the crown." "I used an opportunity," Asher said, his voice hardening. "Suleiman was going to kill him. The Libyans were pulling the strings. That part was true. I gave you the intelligence. I gave you the target. You just misunderstood the reason for the rescue." "And Suleiman," Chilton pressed. "He knew. He was waiting." "I didn't know he was that close," Asher admitted. "My plan was to intercept you on the road to Khartoum, quietly, but he moved too fast. I had to improvise." "Improvise?" Chilton scoffed. He looked at his agents, then back at Asher. "My agents are now burned. My network in Khartoum is finished. All for this humanitarian mission." "They are safe," Asher said, gesturing to Thompson and Sarah. "You're all safe. Suleiman is chasing ghosts in the desert. You have a choice, James. You can report this. You can tell London how Mossad used you. It will be a scandal, and it will be the end of your career. Because you lost the asset." Chilton's eyes blazed. "Or," Asher continued, "you can be the hero. You can report that you successfully extracted a high-value asset, Gideon, from a Libyan-backed ambush. You saved your agents and repelled the enemy. You just lost the asset in the chaos of the firefight. A tragic but heroic failure. You choose the story." The cargo ramp on the C-130 began to rise. The Kedon leader grabbed Asher's arm. "Time." Asher took a step back. The final judgment was not his to receive. It was his to give. "You saved his life, James," Asher said, his voice softening for a moment. "And his family, whatever the reasons. You did that. Thank you." Asher turned and ran up the ramp. It closed, sealing him inside. James Chilton stood alone on the abandoned runway, the wind from the propellers tearing at his clothes, watching the C-130 climb into the night. He was left with his agents, his compromised vehicle, and an impossible story to tell London. The interior of the Hercules was a cold, vibrating cavern, lit by the dim red glow of tactical lighting. It smelled of fuel and sweat. Jonas and his family were strapped into webbing seats, wrapped in blankets by a medic. The children, exhausted by terror, were already asleep. Miron, Jonas's wife, wept silently. Asher sat apart from them, near the cockpit. He unstrapped himself and walked to a small porthole, looking down as the aircraft banked hard over the Red Sea, leaving Sudanese airspace. The desert was a vast, dark emptiness below. The ordeal was over. He felt a profound sense of relief, but no victory. The reflection of his face in the glass showed a man hollowed out by adrenaline and moral compromise. He had succeeded. Jonas was safe. The Kess would be in Jerusalem by morning. This was a major victory for the Beta Israel operation. He had pulled a family from the jaws of the Mukhabarat, using his enemy's enemy as his unwilling tool. It was an operation that would be studied in Tel Aviv for its audacity, but the cost was high. He had burned James Chilton. He had burned MI6. The British were not the enemy, but he had treated them as such. He had sacrificed a vital intelligence relationship, the trust between two friendly services operating in a hostile state, for a tactical objective. There would be fallout. London would be furious. Chilton, whether he told the truth or the lie, would ensure that any Mossad officer found in Khartoum would have no friends at the British embassy. Asher's own cover as Peter Hauser was vaporized. He could never return. The operation had transformed him. He had begun the week as a rescuer, a shepherd. He ended it as a puppeteer, a liar, a man who had manipulated a colleague, risked the lives of British agents, and stolen an asset. He had saved Jonas, but he had compromised a part of himself. He had proven he could be as cold and calculating as the men he was fighting. Jonas walked over and sat beside him. He did not speak for a long time. He simply watched the sky with Asher. "In my village," Jonas said finally, his Hebrew formal, "when a man must dirty his hands to save a child from a well, we do not ask if the water is clean. We only thank him for the life he has saved." Asher looked at the old man, his face a roadmap of dignity and suffering. He had used this man's identity, twisted it into a political weapon, and painted him as a terrorist. "I am sorry for the lies I had to tell," Asher murmured. "You did not lie," Jonas said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "You told a story. You told the Englishmen that I was a man hunted by our enemies, a man whose life was in danger, a man who needed to be saved. All of this was true." Asher closed his eyes. The tension of the last week, the months of fear, finally broke. He felt the sting of tears, not of sadness, but of a terrible, complex release. He had traded one nation's trust for another's survival, a calculation of espionage that left no room for sentiment, only for results. Narrator: Asher Malka never returned to Sudan. James Chilton was recalled to London, where his report of a botched but heroic extraction earned him a desk job and a quiet reprimand. The story of that night was buried, classified by two different governments for two different reasons. But the rescue operations continued, eventually bringing thousands of the Beta Israel to their new home. The world would never know that one of the most critical links in that chain of rescue was forged not by courage alone, but by a cold, brilliant deception in the desert dark. If this story of high-stakes espionage and the moral gray areas of intelligence operations captured your attention, be sure to explore our channel for more deep dives into history's most secret operations. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the most important stories are often the ones that were never meant to be told.